Our sages saw Jacob's ladder as the temple in that place. The Torah describes the temple not as the place where God resides, but as a means of having God reside within humans. And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. This is God instructs the Israelites in the book of Exodus, saying he will dwell among them, not in the actual structure of the temple. So gates of heaven, Sha'ar HaShamayim in Hebrew, in Jewish tradition, as passed on from one generation to the next, the place where Jacob had his dream was Mount Moriah, the same place where Abraham almost sacrificed his son Isaac, the binding of Isaac, and where King Solomon would later build the first temple and Herod would build the final iteration of the second temple. This is the holiest place on earth to the Jewish people and has been for thousands of years. Jews call it Har Habayit, mountain of the temple. After the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians in 586 before Common Era, the social elites and the middle class, the Jewish middle class, were exiled. They feared that they would disappear into the fog of history. So they introduced a vow that Jews continue to use in many occasions, even today, such as wedding. They vowed, I quote, "If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember you, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy." After the second temple was destroyed by the Roman in the year 70 of the Common Era, our sages expanded the references of Jerusalem in Jewish life. This was the anchor that kept us safe for almost 2,000 years until we finally returned home. I will bring you only one example, interesting example. All nations say grace during meals to thank God for the food on their table. But I think that only the Jews add a request to this blessing. They say, thank you, God, for the food, but don't forget to rebuild Jerusalem. The sages have instilled in our collective Jewish psyche the notion that just like human beings cannot survive without food, the Jewish people would not survive without Jerusalem. We spoke about Jacob's dream. The dream of my people during the long night of exile was to return home to Zion. As the poet in Psalms say, when the Lord brought back Zion's exile, we were like dreamers. Ever since King David turned Jerusalem into the capital of the kingdom in the 10th century before Common Era, the name Zion has been synonymous with Jerusalem and the entire land. The Zionist movement, as its name suggests, was only the political expression of that dream, of that aspiration to return home to Zion. For 600 years after the destruction of the Second Temple, the Christian and Persian rulers chose not to build a church on the ruins of the temple. But in the year 638, the Islamic conquest led by Omar ibn al-Khattab reached the city. And toward the end of the century, a mosque had already been built there. But despite this, the Golden Dome Shrine, the famous Golden Dome Shrine built atop the former Jewish site, was not declared a mosque. Only the silver dome building at the perimeter of the compound, Al-Aqsa, which means in the edge, was declared a mosque. Only in the recent years, as the political debate heated up, did the shrine itself get that designation. Despite this, the holiest places for Islam are, we know, in Mecca and Medina. Jerusalem's importance in Islam came later on, if at all. For the Jewish people, however, the Temple Mount remained the holiest place, and this never changed. When the State of Israel was founded in 1948, Jerusalem was not within our borders. This is similar to what Italy experienced with its unification in 1861. Israel without Jerusalem is like having a body without a heart, without a soul. For Italy, it took 9 years to liberate Rome. For Israel, it took 19 years to liberate Jerusalem. During the time that Jordan controlled Jerusalem, no one talked about how Jordan was not willing to live up to its pledge to guarantee the right of Jews to worship in the sites holy to them, for example, Western Wall. In fact, as early as the 1930s, Palestinian nationalists have been trying to create a new narrative that runs contrary to what they had said several years earlier. They began saying that there were never any temples on that mountain and that there is no historical or religious link between the mountain or Jerusalem and the Jewish people. They called it Al-Haykal al-Maz'um, which is imagined a sanctuary or fake sanctuary. They even renamed the Western Wall as Al-Burak, as this was, according to Islamic tradition, the place where the Prophet Muhammad placed his magical horse on his way to the heavens. Until the 30s, the place was the southern wall, not the western wall. It's interesting to note that during those years, the Supreme Muslim Council would regularly publish a brief guide to Haram al-Sharif, which means the Temple Mount. And in all its editions, we have it, you can find it in the internet, during the 1920s and 1930s, the guide specifically said, and they were proud of it, I quote, that this place's identification as the place of Solomon's temple is not in dispute. This is also the place, according to universal tradition, in which the Bible says, and David built there an altar unto the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offering. End of quote of the published book of the Supreme Muslim Council. This is because that is the truth. The Islamic structures were built on that specific mountain precisely because this is where the foundation stone is and where the two Jewish temples were built. After Jews once again returned to their ancient capital, the state of Israel carried out an unprecedented move. It let the holiest place for the Jews to be run exclusively by another faith, even though it didn't hold it with the same degree of holiness, but we gave it to them. Israel only kept the Western Wall, which is a supporting wall for the mountain, but did not keep the mountain itself, even though Jews have prayed for it for thousands of years since its destruction. We thought this concession would prevent a religious war, but it seemed that it didn't. For the past 100 years, every time the Palestinians have wanted to stir tensions and riots, they have claimed that Al-Aqsa was in danger or that the status quo on the mountain was in danger. The reality is exactly the opposite. Israel has been doing its utmost to preserve the status quo there, and has prevented Jews from praying there or even wearing Jewish religious symbols. Imagine, in Israel, they cannot enter with the Star of David openly or to pray. In fact, of the 9 gates to the mountain, non-Muslims are allowed to enter only through one. For almost 13 centuries, there was only one mosque on the mountain, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. But in the wake of Israel's recapturing of Jerusalem, the following has happened. In the 1970s, the Dome of the Rock began serving as a place for Muslim prayer, even though it had never been designated as a mosque. In 1996, a 3rd mosque was built on the mountain, El Marwani Mosque, in what had commonly been called Solomon's Stables. In the early 2000s, many parts of the mountain were paved over with new stones in order to make much of the compound a prayer area. And in 2019, the Golden Gate, the Gate of Mercy, was repurposed as a 5th mosque. As part of its construction on the mountain, the administrators from the Islamic Waqf have destroyed ancient artifacts that had universal value. They have done so while showing disregard to zoning and construction codes and without any supervision by archaeologists, only to eliminate remains of another past that was not Muslim, Jewish or Christian. Any vestige that could attest to the Jewish connection to the mountain is immediately covered or destroyed. On the contrary, Israel's excavation at the bottom of the mountain, for example, at the southern or western walls, has brought to light all the historical layers without any particular preference, including the beautiful Islamic period. Israeli scholars have time and again invited distinguished members of the Supreme Muslim Council and from other bodies to see for themselves the benefits of digging, including when it comes to the site of the Muslim past. But in the Friday sermons, rather than talk about spirituality and morality, the preachers on the Temple Mount often deliver speeches with many threats on Jews and Israel, using the infamous repertoire of anti-Semitic tropes, and you can see it in YouTube. And I haven't even mentioned the rockets fired by Hamas toward Jerusalem and the Temple Mount during the latest escalation in last May, under the false pretext again that Al-Aqsa is in danger. This is pure blasphemy. What a waste. I can go on and on, but I think the picture is clear. And I want to conclude, and I would like to go back to the start of my speech. Temple Mount is the place. It is the gate to the heavens. One can turn it into a place of prayer and spiritual reflection for all nations, especially for monotheistic faith. This is what the prophet Isaiah said in Jerusalem at the 8th century before Common Era. I quote, "For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all people." We have squandered, we wasted such a great opportunity. I myself have seen how Jews and Muslims time and again pray together for rain when there is drought, or for healing when there is illness or pandemic, and how they console one another during time and of mourning. As the prophet Malachi said, I quote, "Have we not all one Father? Have not one God created us? Why do we deal treacherously every man against his brother by profaning the covenant of our fathers? In many cases, when we talk about the conflict, which is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, we try to find a way to get down from the tree of hatred and lack of trust that has grown between us and became much higher over the years. The answer, I believe, though, is in our ancient scriptures. The way to make things better and to get down from that tree of hatred is by using Jacob's dream, Jacob's ladder, by finding the bond between the heavens and the earth, the common faith in one God, and the shared desire to make the world a better place for all humanity. I believe this dream will one day be fulfilled. Our prophet promised us. I believe that the prophecies will be fulfilled as other prophecies have been fulfilled. Inshallah, be'ezrat Hashem, with God's help, con aiuto di Dio. Thank you very much.
Indeed, I'm very grateful on the ambassador's focus on Temple Mount, because in a way it is a landmark example of a microcosm of the macrocosm of issues we're trying to capture in those conversations. How shared, contested sites in a way raise a lot of the issues, challenges, as well as opportunities of raising to the possibilities of using such contested religious sites as a way of at least raising some of the approaches relating to sustainable development. And very often that looks into identifying strategic benefits for state as well as non-state actors to protect religious heritage in general, and also to see mutual strategic benefits for different potential stakeholders. I think now it's time to bring into the conversation my old friend and colleague, Professor Nikos Maghioros from the University of Thessaloniki, who would approach this relating between microcosm and macrocosm of challenges and opportunities of religious cultural heritage protection in a Hellenic setting, because there, as in Israel, there is plenty of material in terms of trying to navigate between state-controlled religious cultural heritage and the interests of religious stakeholders, and often this balance is very difficult to draw from the point of view of state policy. Nikos, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. I would like to thank also the organizers from the honor to invite me one more time in these wonderful meetings, and very useful meetings for many points of view. Actually, I will not start with the Hellenic case. We can discuss about it after our presentations. Actually, I do not have a complete presentation as His Excellency had. I will try just to connect the different aspects of the title of this session, and trying to put on the table some ideas on our subject. So I will start from the last concept, that is the Sustainable growth. What is sustainable growth? Is a development that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Or in other words, is a development that provides long-term benefits in an economic, environmental, and social level by taking care of the needs of present and future generations. So this third element, the social one, I think is what we're interested of in this meeting, because the social element includes religion, first of all, includes culture. And of course, including culture, we include religion. So religion as part of the culture of the human kind is a very important part of what we call sustainable development. All these factors I mentioned before interact and cooperate. Economy, environment, culture. They cooperate, interact. They cannot work autonomously or independently from each other. It's obvious that they have their own particular characteristics and aims. And in this field, although they have these particular characteristics, they still interact and work together. Sustainable development approach is synonymous with an integral, holistic, if you want, dynamic procedure, which involves not only human being, but but also the whole planet. And using a theological term in an eschatological perspective. This sui generis eschatology deals not only with the future of the planet and its inhabitants, but also depends on what we have inherited from previous generation. So it's not only the holistic approach, but we're talking about the continuity of the human kind in this planet. Human beings are in the center of idea of this sustainable growth, either acting as a threat of the mankind, of themselves actually, or as custodians of the existence of all kind of life and of the planet. Man, as a rational and social being animal, is the one who can introduce ethical values, political principles, legal rules, in order to constrain individual or collective egocentric behaviors in order to regulate the way of living, the way of life. In other words, the way our attitude to shared ideals, cultural principles, religious heritage, wealth management. It is therefore a multi-level global approach, a complex approach which deals directly with the coexistence of humans in this planet. In fact, the debate is about our culture and its future. Religious heritage is part of this debate. It's our culture, the way of life, our way of life, the way we understand humanity and our future. Here exactly is where religion is involved or could be involved. Social sustainability rests on principles that may be philosophical, ideological, or theological. The principle, for example, of social justice and intergenerational justice. Religions deal with all the above mentioned parameters, inserting a metaphysical dimension, trying to understand the way that cosmos was created or functions, but also to specify the role of man into this bidimensional reality, physical and metaphysical. Social coexistence, government systems, financial activities involve also God's will and providence. So this is what His Excellency mentioned before. Politics. Politics is always in the front line because politics also include all these parameters, economical, social, not only in a national level, but in the international level. States, organizations, unions around the world do not reject this role of religions and often underline the positive contribution in the society. There are many references in official text in the European Union or in the Council of Europe underlining the positive role that religion communities can play in this social cohesion, peace, pluralism towards a democratic and prosperous society. The protection of religious heritage is a fundamental issue that can be assisted or supported or promoted by religions. According to the European legal tradition and their ethics standards, all religious communities function without undue constraint, in particular as regards their legal status, respecting and promoting equality for all, regardless of racial, ethnic origin, religion or belief, disability, etc., etc. So in this case, as far as concerns religion, we're talking about religious autonomy and religious freedom. This religious autonomy and religious freedom is close connected with the respect of the cultural heritage of each religion. You cannot have a free religion or an autonomous religion without the guarantee of the existence of the its religious patrimony. Because the religious patrimony is the same religion, it is the same historical walk, the historical path of its religions through the centuries. It's not religious patrimony or religious symbol are not just part of religion, it's the same religion. And especially for people who are not, let's say, very close to the theological approach. For simple people, for faithful, a monument, a church, a mosque, a synagogue is religion. So protecting these values that belong to the internal part of the concept of the religion is very important if we guarantee the religious autonomy and the religious freedom. Can religion contribute? Okay, this is what the state must do as far as concerns the religious autonomy. But can religion contribute to the promotion, development, and consolidation of democracy and the rule of law and the respect of human rights and fundamental freedom, the environmental protection, and of course, the protection of the cultural heritage generally, and particularly the protection of the religious heritage? We have to agree that in the 20th century is the century, and now the 21st century, of course, are centuries of religious turmoil, fever. One more time, people were in motion carrying their altars in their luggages. Religion has been globalized following similar procedures of the secular world. The development and facilitation of communication and transportation created the condition to broadcast religious messages instantly, and as well as virtual global religious community. So when we're talking about religious protection or religious heritage, we must not have in our minds only the big religions. There are thousands of religions with different ways of structures, with different way of understanding their role in the society. So this holistic approach of cultural heritage protection must also include all kinds of religions worldwide. And why these people that they are moving in all over the world, what exactly these people carrying in their luggages? Religion includes and covers almost all the aspects of life. And this is the reason why religion is important and at the same time dangerous. The way we eat, dress, speak, love, hate, dream, our future is part of the religion that we belong, or not in any case. In this case, we have the ideology. It can offer an integral, Catholic, interactive, anthropological, social, and eschatological responses through an authority or protests against the unfairness and unlawfulness of the sin. Although in Europe, and particularly as far as concerns Christianity, is ideologically and legally limited in the private sphere, still religion influences the public place. The discussion on the relationship between religion, politics, and cultural diversity is still active and intense in all Europe. One of the reasons is that Europe is consisted of states and societies with a long history and rich cultural tradition, which share some common values and at the same time have specific cultural characteristics. And I think here is where identities, personal identities, collective identities, personal memories, collective memories is involved with the religious cultural heritage, the conflict, the protection, the reconciliation. In case of the case of Balkans is characteristic. Religion defines the national identity. Politics, religion, and society interact. And when we're talking also politics, it's not just national politics, it's geopolitics. There are many, many examples from the Orthodox world, from the Christian Orthodox world, that they can prove, they can explain why this interaction, strong interaction, why and how this interaction works in an international level. So this is also the reason why we need also an international protection of the cultural heritage. Different monasteries around in the Balkans or different churches must be protected, are protected in an international level. I think that I will stop here, dear Peter. I tried, I hope, to a little bit put it in a wider dimension, trying actually to underline this complexity, this connection in different layers.
Well, thank you very much for that. And thank you. Give us a chance to kickstart the conversation. So what has been emerging from both presentations is this connection between essentially protection as well as sharing of benefits. How do we create an environment where the stakeholders involved, whether this is the state, whether this is private autonomous religious associations, get what they would like to get out of protection as well as use of their religious sites, and how this sharing of benefits is going to work without any of those stakeholders losing their authentic identity and authentic witness. And in this process, how linking protection with achieving development goals, conflict forecasting, dealing with identity politics and social and political engineering, rule of law, building of diverse cohesive society is part of the parcel. And how the part of the parcel is about, not so much about coming with pretty monolithic, standardized approaches, but rather is about building ecosystems. And with these ecosystems, the relationships, prevention-driven ways of negotiating spaces, sharing or dealing with contested spaces, makes those ecosystems evolve. There's a lot that could be said about unique monastic republics like Mount Athos, which only allow males to be there in terms of gender equality. But this may not be the nature of the conversation to which one could reach a consensus. Similarly, very often in the context of Israel, when people talk about Temple Mount and the Dome of the Rock, the focus is on Muslim vis-a-vis Jewish dynamics, whereas within this ecosystem, there is plenty of other dynamics. There are internal Jewish debates about whether women or Reformed rabbis could pray at the Western Wall, at which part, which rabbis could wear Torah scrolls and which not. And this only indicates that navigating and negotiating those spaces and reaching consensus is an evolving target. It's a process where at one particular point of time, certain consensus could be reached. Even if the ultimate consensus we may want to reach may not be reached at this particular point of time, but at least the conversation could take us to the next stage. And this seems to very much shape a lot of those specific case studies we have been looking into through the years to try to really capture these different economies of coexistence through which the different stakeholders have been able to share the benefits. Now, one of the most fascinating case studies we came across were the Orthodox Kosovo monastery. So for a number of the Orthodox monasteries in Kosovo. So for a number of years, there had been a tension between Albanian majority and pretty ancient Serbian Orthodox monasteries, which are also UNESCO sites. And a number of charities have tried to come up with a solution. How could we actually come up with an organic model where economies of coexistence could make these different rival groups actually buy into this and share the benefits? And they came up with something which is totally outrageous, but I loved it as an example. So there is a charity which brought in know-how and infrastructure to teach the monks how to produce wine at an industrial scale. But the deal was that the monasteries produce the wine, but they have to buy the grapes from the Albanian Muslims who produce the grapes in the neighborhood. Now, it turned out that the Albanian Muslims couldn't care less what the grapes will be used for because they couldn't find better market for this production. And ultimately, they found things which they may have in common, even if in a larger scheme of things, the two communities wouldn't care very much about each other's subtle aspects of beliefs. They may disagree on certain issues, but they may agree on a mode of coexistence. Similarly, the Bedouins in St. Catherine Monastery in Sinai are seen as protectors of the monastery, in charge of the pilgrims' paths, of the transportation, and they see this based on the covenant which Prophet Muhammad has given them. So we've been looking into this kind of small case studies to see how they could tell us more about how those organically growing ecosystems operate within their own internal paradoxes and differences and challenges, and how those challenges are often addressed at different points of time on different terms, and then at the next stage, different challenges may be addressed differently. And I just wanted to bring Ambassador Eydar to the conversation again. The role of the states vis-a-vis the associational autonomy of religious associations. Now, Israel, to my knowledge, is offering us a unique example where the state, which is often blamed about trying to monopolize religious spaces, had a remarkable resilience in recognizing the right to private property of religious associations. And in fact, it's probably the only country where religious associations are dead set that they could only exercise their right to religious freedom if their right to private property is preserved. So in a way, there is a stepping away of the state of doing too much into messing about with religious association. It's not the Chinese approach where the state owns everything and then allows people to manage, use, or do whatever Big Daddy is choosing to do. Now, do you think that this will remain, or do you think that this is going to change? Is it likely to see a more state intervention as far as the Israeli state is concerned, or do you think that the status quo as we know it now would remain?
So first of all, we have to understand that the way that Israel intertwined religion and state, it's not because, I don't know, Israel is a clerical state, the opposite. Israel is a very liberal and secular state, but the identity of the Israelites, identity of the Jews is not, you cannot define it only by nationality. You know, every time there was a debate, who are the Jews? Are they only religion or a nation? So we just mentioned Jacob. So his second name, for the first time, the history in Genesis, it was when he struggled with the angel, and he gives the angel of God, gives him the name Israel. And Israel, the half of the word El, which means God. It means that in our inner identity as a nation, there is also a religious identity, which we many times, as you mentioned, struggle with it. Doesn't mean that we accept it. You know, Jews all the time love to discuss, to argue. If you open a page of the Talmud, thousands of pages, any page, you have this dialectic of a argument that immediately being attacked by questions and answer that is a base for the another questions. I said that since the first father, the patriarch, Abraham, argued, discussed, maybe fight with God about the fate of Sodom, this became kind of part of the DNA. So when Israel was founded, Of course, it was a liberal democratic country, but in order to keep on our identity, the state took monopoly on one specific field, which is the marriage. So in order to preserve the Jewish, especially after the Holocaust, when we lost 1/3 of the nation. So the same was with many sites. It's true. Only under Israel's sovereignty, especially we can say in Jerusalem or in other places, all religions survived, prosperous. For example, in all the Middle East, the Christian, unfortunately, disgracefully, became the Jews. What the Jews were in the medieval, the Christian now are in the 21st century in the Middle East. They are persecuted in many places. Half of the Christian of the whole Middle East escaped from the Middle East to Canada, to South America, to other places, to Europe. The only community that grows and grows more and more, the only Christian community is the Israeli Christian community, which are more educated even from the Jewish community, according to poll and examinations, etc., etc. So we let everyone have its own place of religions. And I might say that at the last 20 years, there is a new wave in Israeli society, in contrary to what's happening now in Europe, for example, a new wave in Israel that looks at religion not as a problem, but maybe as a solution to the conflict, because the Arab society and the Jewish religious or traditional society are both conservative. They share many values. They can speak about faith. They can speak about being dependent in God. They can speak about redemption. They can pray together. Go to the internet and see rabbis with tefillin and talith and sheikh, Muslim sheikh. Sometimes also there is a priest with them and they pray together. As I said, we have one God. So we have different expressions. So what Israel does is to give a total space for practicing and religious habituary. But from the other hand, the state can protect. It means protects from damaging. We know that in the Temple Mount, there was an Australian tourist that wanted to put a fire there some 50 years ago. And also during the time of the Jordanians, the grandfather of the current king, Abdullah of Jordan, was murdered on the Temple Mount. So what Israel does in many places, in Nazareth and other places, is to protect from protect the place from being interfered by other, and As I said, there is a wave. I hope that this wave will grow more and more of participating together. I might say, I have my father was a Cohen, a priest. My family, I don't know, some 2,500 years ago, 3,000, were priests in Jerusalem in the temple. But my father had in his library, as a kid, I used to, to look at his book. He has, as a matter of obvious, he has also Quran. He has also New Testament. Even though he was the cantor in the synagogue. But there is lots of common ground that we can use. And as I said, we wasted. I think that Europe and the West, because of revolution of a couple hundred years, Europe in a way lost one, religion or tradition, and also lost sense of nationality. So in a way, it's a problem for the liberal elite to engage with conservative societies or primordial societies, not from a point of patronizing or only rationalism, but also from what I called in my articles, the difference between mythos and logos. While the West all the time focus in logos, the world, we know it, that the world has also a huge part of mythos in its personality. It's like to relate, to treat a person only by its external behavior and statements, and not to take into considerations also his dreams, his desires, his relations with his family and parents, etc. What all the subconscious of his personality, if you want to understand. So the subconscious, I may borrow it, the subconscious of nations, of humanity, is the mythical point, is the religious point. And if we do not take it into consideration as Europe, for example, does it, they relate religion only in a rational way and not from inside it, we will be blocked. But if we open our mind to understand the role of religion, and I agree with the professor that also the sites of religion are part of religion, it's like the corpus of religion. If we understand it, there will be a chance to get inside from and to create a language that only also diplomats could speak, not only on the basis of interests, but also on the basis of values, of faith, and of religious interest, but not interest, economic interest of religion or control, but a real interest, interest of grace, interest of being safe in religion, and interest of praying together. This is what I think that Israel is kind of a lab to understand it. It's not all the time. It's, we are not in a garden of roses in Israel, and politics many times destroys the common ground, religious common ground, but we struggle. And I might say that from my experience, when you can put aside the politics, you find that also sheikhs, Muslim sheikhs, they are happy to speak with you because we understand each other. We understand each other not from outside, from inside. And this is a key.
And one of the things which is coming as a common thread is really working one's way around the preservation, the cultural preservation, the restoration, conservation, and so on and so forth, and the interests of the religious stakeholders, which are sometimes difficult to reconcile. We have seen it happening in the context of Hagia Sophia and the horror museums in Istanbul. We have seen it in the ongoing debates between the Jordanian archaeologists and the Israeli archaeologists over the Dome of the Rock, which makes you feel, when you read the UNESCO reports about the restorations, as if they talk about two different sites, and which eventually led to Israel leaving UNESCO because they felt that the organization doesn't really work that well as a cultural preservation organization. Nikos, how does that work in the context in which you operate? But how is the cultural preservation and conservation vis-a-vis religious autonomy claims navigated and negotiated in Greece? Because obviously you would have pretty much similar issues of beautiful ancient sites where the state would like to take control over the conservation and the preservation, and religious associations which are likely to say, no, these are primarily our private property, therefore worship, and therefore we want to have control over what's happening there at any given time.
Well, of course, well, let's start with this. We don't have huge problems in Greece as far as concerned the debate between different religions, as in other countries, of Balkan countries especially. Well, there is a new law, relatively new, since 2002, replaced an older law from 1932. And he tried to renew, systematize, and insert the international, the European and international law in the national law, preserving all the monuments. And there's a very sophisticated law. It depends of the age of the monument, and this law rules the kind of the protection that that must have the concrete monument. Well, actually, I think that the debate between religions and state comes oftenly. Very famous, let's say, a very well-known example is the church of the Rotonda Church, or the San George Church of Thessaloniki. I don't know if you're aware of this ancient monument, that it has well preserved, first of all, and it is has a long history, symbolizes also this cultural and religious richness of the city. In the center of. When was it? It was it was around the 2nd century, I think. Yes, yes. So it is. It was a Roman. It was a Roman building for the burying the building, and then it became a Christian church, and then it became a mosque, and it was then came back as the function. The state decided to. It was a period that it was a museum, and then the Greek Orthodox Church claimed that that the monument should be a Christian church, but it was a long debate with some groups of citizens that they say that this monument belongs as a cultural heritage, generally speaking, it's not something concrete Christian. So it was a long debate in the Greek courts, and they decided that to keep the secular, if you want, character of the monument, and to give the permission to the church, to the Orthodox Church, to celebrate one Sunday each month. So it was a kind of solution, and it's a museum now. Everybody can visit it, but here it was the conflict between the right of religious cult, of religious to participate in the religious ceremonies, etc., and the general right to participate in your right of culture, to participate in a cultural good for all the society. So the idea of the court was that there are many churches around, so no need to make another church and to change the use of the Rotonda as a Christian church. So people faithful, Orthodox faithful, can follow their liturgical life in different churches around. So that was the end of the story. But only,
Again,
usually,
one particular example where the it presents the challenge and the opportunity that we very often focus on navigating between a museum and a religious site. And we're only beginning to connect the tangible and the intangible dimension of the religious sites, the rituals, the pilgrims' paths, what happens at a particular site, and the site itself. The site as a cultural site, the site as a religious site, and the different intangible things which are happening there, and without which the site cannot be understood fully. And without the preservation and the protection of those intangible aspects, it is very difficult to navigate and negotiate a proper form of protection and imagining of this site. And this is particularly challenging with sites which are contested or shared. Intangible, moving. No, I'm talking about relationship between the sound, light, and the building. So one of the most fascinating things about Hagia Sophia was that the building itself is a UNESCO site, but that's not all that the building is. There is an incredible way in which light works there. So the floor is carved in a particular marble where the light at a particular time of the day falls on the marble, which is carved as the waves of the sea, and you feel as if you walk on water because of the way the building has been designed in the first place to work with light. You could never, you're not able to experience this anymore because now this is covered with carpets. The sound is different because the acoustic has changed and so on and so forth. And the reason this is happening is not because a particular religious community doesn't care about religious preservation. It's because we have not developed the grammar of this less obvious and less visible dimensions of understanding how a particular site works through the people who go through it, through the rituals, the prayers, and everything else that happens there. And we're only beginning to learn it. There are certainly some very interesting examples of policy approaches to bringing this movable and immovable dimensions closer together and describing them in terms of policies and laws, but we're only at the beginning of it. And bringing the tangible and the intangible is also an opportunity to try to capture the different memories, different imaginations of how you could imagine this site. And without this, it is very, very difficult to go beyond the purely property-based approach. This is owned by the state, or this is owned by this particular religion, and does not give an opportunity of these multiple identities to emerge, which are there despite the fact that that the site is owned by one association or another, and makes it less problematic that the fact that something is owned by one community, but it's imagined as a holy site by another community, and so on and so forth. One of the most fascinating things, and on this we shall close our conversation, was when we were doing this project with the Church of England. There was a wonderful colleague of ours, Emre Oktem from Turkey, who gave us an example of the Horror Church, which was museum, has one of the most fascinating Byzantine mosaics there. And he said, do you know what? The greatest art historian in Turkey at the moment became an art historian because he was taken by his grandfather to a prayer, Friday prayer, in the Horror Mosque before it was made a museum. And the young child was so captivated by this mosaic. He had never seen anything like this. And this is what made him to actually fall in love with art history. And he became one of the most established Turkish art historians, with a connecting point with culture which has nothing to do with his grandfather's religion, but with the space, intellectual and cultural space, where you could appropriate cultural layers of another religious culture which is not yours, but it's sometimes embedded, incorporated in your wider imaginations. And at the moment, our cultural policies, trying to bring culture and religion together, have not succeeded that much, but we're making small steps with these conversations, and with conversations which continue beyond this, this event, trying to bridge the gaps between policy approaches and imaginations, more mythological type of visions of how we could see particular spaces, which at the level of sociology and politics may look like a battleground, but in a through most sophisticated discourses, they could become something very important, which brings different divided societies, divided communities closer together, and from battlegrounds become focal points for creating dialogical civic spaces within which different groups could thrive rather than kill each other. And on this, we're going to close our session. It is, we were meant to finish at 11. We're already overrun by 2 minutes. And those conversations will continue. Feel free to stay and continue our conversations informally, and stay connected. There will be plenty of other events we'll be running in connection with the topic, and in conjunction with the forthcoming G20 Interfaith Forum in Indonesia next year. Thank you all for coming.
Just to correct, actually the monument was in the beginning of the 4th century, not in the 2nd. I said before. Thank you very much.